Oh, he's not my husband. Rebecca smiled sweetly at the cafe owner, who gave her a quizzical look. He's my boyfriend. As she spoke, she glanced over at Kyle in the doorway, hoping he hadn't heard what she had said. She had never admitted out loud to anyone before that he was her boyfriend, and the thrill of it made her heart skip a beat. She had never admitted it, even to Kyle, because she didn't think his ego needed any further boosting. So, at least for the time being, she wouldn't tell him how she felt. She would wait until he told her his feelings again, and then she would confess. The cafe owner went to prepare their breakfast, and Rebecca sat pondering her emotions until Kyle returned. He sat down opposite her and told her that the international aid plan that they had been executing was about to come to an end. We've done the immediate search and rescue response. Now it's time for the other countries to come in with the financial aid. Their food arrived, and Kyle's eyes widened at the sumptuous meal the old lady placed before them. What's this costing us? He whispered to Rebecca after the woman had gone. Nothing. It's free. The lady wanted to repay us for rescuing her sons. She grinned at him. You and I are officially heroes. Kyle chuckled and nodded to the cafe owner, who smiled back at him. He looked at Rebecca mischievously. Now I come to think of it, you also saved me. I guess that means I should repay you, too. Rebecca raised one eyebrow at him. What do you mean by that exactly? I'm just happy you're safe and well. That's enough repayment for me. No, I'd like to repay you more practically. Like what? Rebecca was curious. I'll give you something when we get back home. She shrugged, and the two of them chatted and dug into their breakfast. When they had finished eating the most delicious meal they had eaten in weeks, they bade farewell to the old lady and walked out onto the street. Kyle was excited that their mission was coming to an end, and he took out his phone to take a photo of Rebecca. Hold on. Before you start taking pictures of me, I need to make sure I look okay. She used her phone's selfie mode to check her appearance and cried out indignantly. Why didn't you tell me my hair was like a bird's nest? Because I didn't think it was. She flattened her hair with her hand in an attempt to tidy it up, and Kyle went over to inspect. I don't see any birds nesting in there. Rebecca punched him on the arm, and he laughed and ran away from her. She chased him, and as she ran, she accidentally bumped into a young man walking in the opposite direction. She stopped and turned to apologize to the man, and when she looked away again, she realized that she recognized his face. Was that Bruno? But when she turned around to look again, he had disappeared. Growing up, she had met Bruno several times, but after she had returned to the U.S., she had only ever seen him in Layla's social media posts. She couldn't be sure that he was the person she'd bumped into, but he had certainly looked a lot like him. She scanned the area again, but there was no sign of him. Was it him, or am I mistaken? Rebecca shoved the thought to the back of her mind and went to join Kyle, who had been wondering what she was doing. What's up? I just saw someone who looked familiar, but it probably wasn't him. That would be too much of a coincidence. Then, she spotted something on Kyle's head. What's that? Huh? He touched his head where she was pointing, and his fingers came away covered in bird poop. Ew, that's gross. She laughed out loud. Kyle frowned and looked around in his pockets for a handkerchief, but before he wiped his head, he put his phone on selfie mode to get a look at how much poop there was. Rebecca couldn't control her laughter. Oh, Kyle, it looks like you're the one with the bird's nest in your hair. He chuckled and thought how adorable she looked when she laughed. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward him. Isn't it supposed to be good luck to have a bird poop on your head? The two of them chatted and laughed together, and they continued on their walk. Meanwhile, in an inconspicuous house on the other side of the street, a man was loading bullets into a gun. Bruno walked over to him, and the man pointed the gun at his head. But Bruno wasn't bothered. He knew he wasn't going to shoot him. Ever since Bruno had disappeared, he had developed a cold indifference to everything around him. It was different from the hostile shroud he had built years earlier to protect himself from emotional pain. The new barriers protected him from so much more than that. He walked to the couch with the gun still pointed at his head and sat down. He took a USB stick out of his pocket and tossed it to the man with the gun. "I'm tired. I'm going to take a rest." The man caught the USB drive in one hand, disabled his gun, and shrugged. "Whatever." Then he got up and left the room. Without bothering to remove his shoes, Bruno lay down on the couch and closed his eyes. His phone vibrated, and he tutted with annoyance. He fished it out of his pocket and read the new email. It was from Mr. K's associate, Mr. Y. At first, he thought it was a new mission, but all the email contained was a series of photos. Bruno's face froze when he saw the subject of the pictures. It was Layla. The first photo was of her and some girlfriends laughing together. She looked exactly how he remembered her, except that her face had thinned out slightly. He gazed at her smiling face, and her entire body seemed to be glowing. A faint smile formed on his face as he flicked to the next image, but again, his face froze when he saw it. In it, Layla was drinking coffee with a good-looking boy, and they were smiling warmly at each other. Bruno tightened his grip on the phone and stared at the photo for several seconds before opening the next one. The third image was again of Layla and the same boy. She was writing in a book, and he was sitting beside her with his arm in a plaster cast, obviously unable to write for himself, and gazing at her. On the desk in front of them were 2 paper cups of coffee. Bruno stared at the image and pondered how relaxed and happy they both looked. He flicked through the 3 pictures again and understood exactly what Mr. K was trying to say to him. He wanted him to know that Layla had moved on. He was no longer the old Bruno. When he had set foot inside Mr. K's manor house, he had relinquished every part of his past and had adopted a new life that held little meaning to him. In his old life, he had nearly died twice, but even with his meaningless new life, he wasn't ready to taste death again just yet. He didn't like the feeling of powerlessness. He liked being at the edge of danger, because only then did he feel alive. Bruno closed the 2 photos of Layla and the boy and focused on the one of her with her girlfriends. He stared at it until the tiredness penetrated his entire body, and he fell asleep. His phone slipped out of his hand and fell to the floor at the exact moment that Mr. Y's email was automatically erased from it. Rebecca and Kyle went to Guayaquil. It was the second largest city in Ecuador. The difference between the rich and the poor throughout the city was huge, and it was very evident in the city. They saw a luxurious hotel only a couple blocks away from those scratching to make a living. The volunteers were all staying in a vacation lodge. The conditions weren't great, but Rebecca was finally able to take a bath. After washing up, she changed into a clean set of clothes and headed outside. She found Lee and a couple of others talking about a shooting that had happened 2 hours after they had left. It was believed that someone had sent to snatch some information that was on a USB drive. In the end, the item had been taken from one man from out of the area, and another visitor had been injured. Rebecca was puzzled. Were they foreigners? Yeah, they weren't from around here, Lee explained. I heard the same story from a local friend. Rebecca nodded. For some reason, she felt uneasy and wondered who the injured party could be. At the same time, in a dimly lit room, a cloaked man was playing with the USB stick in his hand. He looked at Callum, who was sitting in front of him. How do you feel? I don't feel anything, sir. I heard you killed a local and injured someone else. Callum thought for a while before he answered. The locals are weak. They have no fighting ability. The others just aren't vigilant enough. They're too relaxed. Although you aren't happy, your performance wasn't bad. The man in the cloak cocked his head. What do you want? Callum just looked confused and shook his head. I don't want anything. Very good. The man smiled and looked thoughtful. But you can't go unrewarded. How about I give you a woman? Callum looked even more puzzled. You're old enough. Don't you want a woman? After you've had a taste, you want more. He stood up and went to the door. I'll send someone shortly. The room fell silent. Callum stayed where he was, and after a while, the door opened again. He smelled a faint scent of perfume. He had gotten used to seeing under the dim light, so he saw the woman's face clearly as she entered. she was a local. Her skin was glowing, her facial features were delicate, and her figure was very appealing. She was wearing a skirt that flowed beautifully and was split right to the top of her legs. She walked cat-like toward him and placed her hand on his chest. Her hand was soft, and as soon as it touched him, his body stiffened. She laughed softly, tiptoed around him, and blew into his ear. He was like any man faced with temptation, and his body reacted instinctively. His mind was surprisingly calm and clear, though. He didn't know why he was able to keep his wits about him. He was aware of an inner voice telling him not to give in. Deep down, he believed that some things were more important than others, and he knew that once certain steps were taken, he wouldn't be able to take them back. The woman caressed his body, but he just stood still and straight. He looked around and saw 2 cameras in the room. When he realized that he was being monitored, his instincts told him that he shouldn't do anything with the woman with people watching. Callum pushed her in front of him and slightly jumped. As he did so, he destroyed one of the cameras, and then he used the same method to get rid of the other one. In another room, the cloaked man looked at the monitor screen that suddenly showed only snow. He smiled. He wondered for a second if something untoward was going on, but he didn't think Callum could do anything because the effects of the medicines were irreversible. He took a sip of his drink as he inserted the USB drive into his computer. A map showing the layout of a business appeared on the screen, with every project detailed in separate folders. He scanned the information and then began to analyze it in detail. Intent on his purpose, he didn't realize how quickly time was passing. After a while, he noticed that the sky had completely darkened, and he remembered Callum. He went back to the room, but the door was opened before he even knocked. Callum hadn't expected the man in the cloak to be at the door, so he stopped in his tracks. She fainted. The older man raised his eyebrows and looked at his younger and stronger counterpart. As soon as he walked into the room, he smelled the musky scent of sex in the air, and any suspicion about why the cameras had been destroyed disappeared. The woman was lying on the couch. Her hair was messy, her skirt hiked up, and her eyes were tightly shut. She looked as though she had indeed passed out. It was rare for the cloaked man to laugh, but he did, although his voice was still glum-sounding when he spoke. "How did you enjoy that, Chester?" Callum gave it some thought and replied seriously. "It was very pleasant." "Really?" The other man thought it was an interesting response. He had been expecting more. "Yeah," Callum shrugged. "I would do it again." "Very good. When you complete more missions, I'll give you more women." "Thank you, sir." The cloaked man looked at him with an expression that borderlined on dislike. He didn't want to bother with Callum anymore, so he stood up and went out to ask someone to remove the woman from the premises. Back in the room, Callum was feeling uncomfortable about everything, so he went straight to the bathroom to shower. As the water washed over him, he felt his whole body start to relax. He had followed his inner voice during the whole interaction, but he had been confused by how he had known so much. He had thought about asking his master, the cloaked man, about it, but the same instinct had told him that he should have some secrets. He decided not to say anything. Rebecca and Kyle worked hard for another 2 days to complete their mission before flying back to New York. The task had been perfectly executed, so everyone was rewarded upon their return. The news of Rebecca going on a solo flight to save Kyle quickly spread throughout the base. As she left her dorm a day later, Rebecca met another female soldier. She paid no attention until the other woman stopped her. When Rebecca looked at her properly, she realized that it was the same soldier from the event planning crew who had set her sights on Kyle. The woman stood in front of her, hesitated for a moment, and finally spoke. "I heard that you flew out to save the captain, and that you even saved his chopper. That must have taken some pretty skilled flying. I've heard that your medical skills are top-notch too." Rebecca was somewhat unclear about where the conversation was heading, so she didn't say anything. The other woman continued. "You're quite amazing. No wonder he likes you." Rebecca blinked. "Thanks. I wanted to apologize for hitting on him. I didn't know you two were together, but he never noticed me anyway. It was all my wishful thinking." Rebecca looked at the woman and felt somewhat bemused. She realized she couldn't hate her after that and smiled. Okay, it's water under the bridge. I just don't want you to hate me. The other soldier bit her lip. I'm sorry for disturbing you back then. You can tell him that too. She didn't wait for Rebecca to say anything and turned to leave. Rebecca looked at the departing figure of the other female soldier with a surprised smile on her face. She appreciated the fact that the other woman had kept things above board and had known when it was time to backtrack. There weren't many girls in the army. Rebecca had sometimes wished that there was someone to chat to who was like her. And thinking about that gave her an idea. She wondered if she could get in touch with the other female soldiers who had been part of the festival. There had been a few of them, and she thought that the chances were pretty good that at least some of them would get along. She sent a message to Kyle. What's the name of that woman who was part of the planning group who likes you? He replied almost instantly. I'm not sure. I don't know her at all. Rebecca's mouth twitched because she wasn't entirely convinced that he had told the truth. She sent a message to Lee instead. What's the name of the female soldier who has the hots for the captain? Lee held his phone as though it were a hot potato. While they had been in Ecuador, it had been clear that the captain treated Rebecca differently, even though nothing official was ever said. He wondered if Rebecca was trying to stir up the past with her message. And the idea of being involved gave him an instant headache. He didn't know what to say. Rebecca saw that Lee had read the message, but the little dots ticked over for a long time with no reply. She grew impatient and sent him another one. I'm not asking for much. Just give me a name. Then Lee saw it. When Lee saw that, it put him in even more of a dilemma. Rebecca had shown her fierceness in Ecuador, and the way she had instantly fallen a man so much bigger than her was still vivid in his mind. She had rescued Kyle as she said she would, and she always trained fully with the squad. While she looked weaker on the outside than many, she was very powerful. She wanted a name, and he didn't know what to do. He was almost shaking at the thought of upsetting either her or their captain. Rebecca knew that he was being evasive, so she called him instead. Did you see the message I sent you? He cleared his throat. Hi, Rebecca. Yes, I saw it. So, do you know what her name is? He surrendered quickly. Her name's Jacqueline. Don't be impulsive. She didn't let him finish. Okay, thank you. I'm going to find her. Another soldier noticed Lee's expression as he put down his phone. What's wrong? I heard you mention both Jacqueline and Rebecca. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Lee looked slightly horrified. I'm sure it's over. Rebecca just said she wanted to find Jacqueline. It can't be that they're going to fight, can it? He sighed. I couldn't stop her. There were looks of interest from all around the room. Rebecca's a mighty prospect. If you think she's going to find Jacqueline, we should go and support her. Lee hit the soldier on the arm. Don't be stupid. Jacqueline's family background in the military goes way back. We can't go against her. Would you bet against Rebecca? It's a fight between two big shots, Lee replied. Why would mere mortals like us want to join in? I think it's better to inform Kyle as soon as possible. As they were talking, someone had taken the initiative and called Kyle. Kyle, we think something's going down. Rebecca's going to tackle Jacqueline head on. Kyle had been about to head in for a meeting when he heard that, but he stopped. What do you mean? Exactly what I said. Rebecca asked Jacqueline's name and said she was going to find her as soon as possible. Kyle was confused. Who's Jacqueline? The soldier hadn't expected that Kyle wouldn't know who he was talking about. Jacqueline, the female soldier who's been into you for years. Kyle had had enough of the conversation. I've got a meeting. After saying that, he hung up the phone. The other soldiers looked at their colleague curiously. What did he say? He said that he had a meeting and hung up. He's a cool customer, isn't he? He's playing his cards quite close to his chest. Lee couldn't help but feel slightly emasculated by Kyle's show of inner strength. He sighed, because he had seen how strong Rebecca was with his own eyes. While that conversation was taking place, Rebecca found Jacqueline and several other female soldiers. She heard them talking through the door of the rehearsal room, and it was clear that they were planning another event. Why hasn't the pianist arrived yet? He says he's on his way. Why don't we just dance without music? That won't do. We need the music to create the concert feel, and we have to perform tonight. We haven't even rehearsed together yet. What should we do? Who knows how to play the piano? Jacqueline, don't you know how to play the piano? She can't do it. She's the lead dancer. As everyone was talking, Rebecca pushed open the door to the rehearsal room and stepped inside. Jacqueline was stunned when she saw her, but she didn't say anything. Rebecca volunteered to help them. I know how to play the piano. I can do it for you. Everyone looked at each other and then at Rebecca in confusion. She smiled at everyone. I'm Rebecca. I'm sure I've met some of you. I performed at the Mid-Autumn Festival, so you might have seen me there. Ah, I do know you, one member of the group said. We were a long way from the stage and couldn't see clearly. We heard about you, though, and you're far more beautiful close up. Rebecca moved to the piano. We've got a day off training, so I've come over to see what you're up to. I hope you don't mind. I don't mind at all. One of the women looked at her excitedly. I heard them say that you were instrumental during the disaster relief and that you did some amazing flying. Rebecca smiled. I'll tell you about what happened later. Have you got the score? I'll play it for you. Jacqueline walked over and flipped open a book to the relevant page. She sized Rebecca up. Are you here to help us? Rebecca leaned in closer and grinned naughtily. You mean, am I here to wreck things instead? Jacqueline paused to elevate the situation, but when she saw that the smile had reached Rebecca's eyes, she felt relieved and pushed any remaining fears aside. She knew that she couldn't hate her, and decided that she actually kind of liked her attitude. She could see why Kyle liked her. Jacqueline had always prided herself on knowing the right path to take, so she matched her smile. I'll dance and see if it works. You're not a ballet dancer, are you? Rebecca shook her head. I heard that being on point hurts. I've never got that far. Ah, I have one thing that I can beat you in. She ushered everyone to their places in preparation. Rebecca started to play. Her rendition wasn't perfect, as it was the first time that she had played the piece, but she had had enough years of practice to make a passable attempt. Jacqueline and the other dancers began. They moved smoothly over the floor in their classical ballet tutus. Once Rebecca had played it twice through, she had gained enough familiarity with the music to remember some of the passages, so she was able to watch the women dance while she played. None of them were very old, and she guessed that most of them were in their 20s. They were all linked to the army, but had varying literary or performance backgrounds too. Rebecca enjoyed the atmosphere and gradually immersed herself in the music. Her slender fingers flew over the keys, and her face showed how peaceful she felt. After the third run-through, she stopped. Do you want to stop for a break? Everyone nodded and went to get some water. Rebecca got up and tried some of the movements that she had seen. Jacqueline came up behind her and gave her some pointers. Raise your chin a little higher. You can't be too stiff. You need to stand up straighter, and your leg position isn't right. She showed her what it should look like. Rebecca tried again. Is this right? Jacqueline nodded. You're doing great. Can you take a photo? Rebecca asked as she struggled to maintain her pose. I want to send it to my friends to show off. Although her words sounded arrogant, Jacqueline didn't feel it was part of her personality. She happily did as Rebecca had requested and walked around to find the best angle to take the picture. There you go. Rebecca relaxed and smiled. That was hard. She then used one hand to push off the ground and did a side flip in the air. There was a general feeling of surprise in the room. Wow, Rebecca, is there anything you can't do? Jacqueline's pretty good with that stuff too. Rebecca's eyes lit up. Is that so? Come and join me. Jacqueline wandered over and did a backflip followed by a side somersault. She moved very skillfully. Rebecca clapped. I'm so pleased to meet you properly. Why don't you come and train with the airborne squad? One of the women laughed quietly. I don't think you want Jacqueline around your captain. Yeah, but I think it's time you move on, Jacqueline. You and Kyle would never make a good match anyway. Jacqueline quickly shut that conversation down. I've already decided not to chase after him. I'll find an even more handsome boyfriend. With that said, the chat continued happily. Rebecca continued to play for them until she was interrupted by a phone call. It was Kyle. Please come to the conference room immediately. We have an important task for you. He sounded serious. She knew her time for messing around had come to an end. Okay, I'm on my way. She looked regretful at her new friends. I have to head back for a meeting. Come back another day, was the parting cry. Rebecca walked as quickly as she could to join the meeting. On the way, she heard her phone ping with a notification. Jacqueline had sent her the photo of her in the dance pose, and she loved the way she looked in it. She replied quickly with her thanks. When she got to the conference room, Kyle was waiting for her at the door. She followed him in. Inside was the base commander, Colonel Chase Hunter. Rebecca stood beside Kyle and saluted the colonel. Colonel Hunter gestured for her to be at ease. We currently have a highly classified mission. We need a female soldier, and we feel you're a suitable candidate. He took out a document bag. Because classified missions are often dangerous, and you're new to the Army, you have a choice about whether you want to participate. Rebecca replied without hesitation. I've considered it. I'm willing. Kyle had guessed that she would say that, but he sighed inwardly. He wasn't keen for her to join the mission, but he also knew that she was the most suitable person to take it on. Colonel Hunter handed her the document. This specifies the organization and the location of the mission. You can take a look at it later, but I'll tell you a bit about the situation now. You know that we've long been allied with Chile, and we have a biological experiment base built there. We've recently discovered that there is a spy in the facility, so we need you and Kyle to enter the base and find out who it is. Rebecca was a little surprised when she heard what the task was. Do you have a specific plan to find them all? You'll be going in as an assistant researcher. We'll act further when the time comes. He took out a map and opened it. The facility is here. Transportation is a little difficult as a lot of the country is desert, but the aircraft at the base will be made available to you when you need them. He took out a pen and drew on the map. The situation is made more complicated by its shared border with Peru. Peru watches everything very closely. It's like a tiger stalking its prey. Also, due to the economic benefit of the base, countries aligned with Peru have been eyeing the research results as well. You'll be well equipped with weapons to ensure your safety. Rebecca and Kyle nodded. The colonel continued. We can only send the two of you there, but to further ensure your safety, our allied troops there will cooperate with you at any time. They nodded again. Rebecca remembered the news that she had read that morning. I saw on the news earlier that factions in Peru want to take control of the area in Chile. Is that true? Will we be stuck in a war zone? Colonel Hunter looked at her seriously. At present, we can't answer that definitively. So being involved in a skirmish over there is something we have to consider. Rebecca nodded one final time. Okay. We can never rule out the possibility, so you must be flexible. The colonel added. You must ensure your own safety before trying to complete the mission. He looked up at Kyle. Protect her. She is young and inexperienced. Kyle held his gaze solemnly. I'll do my best. The colonel turned back to Rebecca. After you look at the information, you'll know why you are the most suitable candidate. Rebecca and Kyle left together and went to Kyle's room. Rebecca read through the information while Kyle started to prepare the things they needed for their departure. When she had finished reading, she looked up and smiled. Looks like I really do have a use for all my skills. But you don't understand pharmacology at all. I love that you'll be my assistant. Kyle took out his bag and started to pack. He glanced at Rebecca and smiled knowingly. Yes, I'll be your personal assistant while we're there. Rebecca sensed an undercurrent to his words, and she felt her face grow hot. She felt flustered. I probably won't need one. I'm not sure you're suited to the position. Kyle had just packed a military compress into the bag when he heard Rebecca's cheeky comment. He spun around, strode across the room, and leaned over her with both arms on either side of her body, pinning her in between himself and the couch. He grinned. I didn't know you liked your men subservient and weak. Rebecca felt his breath against her face, and she bit her bottom lip before pouting. Yeah, it's the only way you'll get close to me. He stared into her almond-shaped eyes as he inched closer to her. I can think of many other ways to get closer to you. Rebecca raised her eyebrows and smiled seductively. I'm not sure you're up to the task of being my assistant. Kyle's breathing quickened. I am. I promise you won't regret it. Rebecca pressed her back into the couch and gazed at him. She kept quiet before smiling. Are you telling me you're the best candidate for the job? He looked at her with a burning desire in his dark eyes. It's the truth. You won't want to consider anyone else once you see how good I am. Her eyes widened, and she drew in a quick gasp of air. She couldn't believe he could be so shameless. Kyle gazed at her and knew her thoughts were racing. He wondered if she had picked up on his subtle innuendo or missed the mark completely. The atmosphere had become intense, and Rebecca's heart raced. She could sense his desire for her, and she realized she had taken things too far. She tried to squirm out of his arms. I need to pack. You'll have to tell me what to take since I've never been on a mission. I'll wait for you to finish packing your things first. He nodded and became serious. I'll first have to show you how to use the gear we're taking. He quietly scanned her face, and the corner of his lips curled when he saw a flicker of embarrassment in her eyes. He stood up and casually stretched before returning to his packing. Rebecca was speechless. Kyle's flirting was too much for her. She had thought she'd take things to the next level with him, but now she wasn't sure about it. She reminded herself she was supposed to wait until she was at least 20, just like her mother had done. Kyle's lust for her had grown stronger, and she worried that neither of them would be able to control themselves for much longer. He finished packing a bag of clothing and a box of tools and equipment before going with Rebecca to her room to help her pack. Rebecca pulled her suitcase out from under her bed. Kyle took one look at it and frowned. Do you have anything less expensive? She shook her head. No, I've always used this brand. Kyle thought about it briefly and nodded. Okay, I suppose it could work. No one will doubt your identity if you use an expensive brand name like that. He walked over to her cupboard and began to pick out her clothing. She had never seen a man choose clothing for a woman, and she watched him curiously. He swiftly selected a few matching items and inspected the labels sewn into them. These are also expensive brand names. Rebecca smiled. Of course. I'm not just a soldier. I'm also a rich and beautiful woman. He caught her cunning gaze and gulped. Yeah, my rich and beautiful girlfriend. I haven't agreed to be your girlfriend yet. Kyle didn't frown or look upset. Instead, he grinned at her. That's what you say now, but it'll happen sooner or later. Rebecca glared at him. His audacity irked her, and she raised her eyebrows. So, what if I meet a smart and handsome PhD student in Chile and fall in love with him? Kyle didn't respond and laid the clothing on the couch. He folded each item neatly and stacked them into a pile. He then packed the pile into her suitcase and glared at her. Sure, if you want to do that, go ahead. Rebecca thought she might just find someone else, seeing as Kyle suddenly seemed not to care. She didn't say anything, but noticed he looked irritated and somewhat angry. He walked into the bathroom to pack her toiletries. As she laid on her bed and watched him, she began to laugh. I must say, you're doing a great job of being my assistant. He placed the toiletry bag neatly between the folded clothing and zipped the suitcase to close it. Rebecca was a seasoned traveler, but had never seen such a perfectly packed bag before. Kyle looked up at her. Becky, there's lots about me that you don't know. you'll slowly get to learn more about me." He opened a small box of tools and equipment. Rebecca knew she needed to understand how each item worked, so she sat up and paid attention as Kyle began to explain. He took out a multi-tool. "This is custom-made and has several uses." He described each function carefully before packing the multi-tool away. He then picked up a coil of rope. "This rope is made from the latest technology. It's ultra-light, durable, and very strong. It can handle about 3,000 pounds of dead weight." He packed the rope beside the multi-tool and picked up a military compass. "This is a specialized compass. Let me show you how to use it." He walked outside into the hallway and made her point out which direction was north, east, south, and west. She already knew and indicated the coordinates without using a compass. Kyle shook his head. "It's easy when you know where you are, but out in the desert or jungle, you won't always automatically know which direction is north." He demonstrated how to use it and then gave her a turn. Rebecca had learned about using a compass while still at the Air Force Academy, and although she knew the theory, she lacked the hands-on experience. Kyle showed her a few tricks and gave her tips on using it more effectively. He leaned over her shoulder and cupped her hand in his open palm, turning her to face north. Rebecca felt Kyle's warm breath against the nape of her neck as he wrapped his strong arms around her body. She tried to wiggle free, but he had already lifted the compass in line with her eyes. "Look, Becky, you have to hold it at the correct angle to get the best reading." He pointed to the spirit level on the compass. He spoke in a deep voice as he patiently explained what to do. "Use this as a guide. The air bubble has to be in the middle of the glass tube. You'll see the scale measurements on the side of the cover to judge distance and turn the dial to lock in your direction you want to go. When you use a standard pistol, how far is the range?" Rebecca felt slightly annoyed that he was asking her things she already knew, but she answered anyway. Kyle nodded slightly. "Yeah, that's correct. So you can use the compass to help you determine the best angle, direction, and range before you shoot. There's a trick that they don't teach at the academy, which makes the calculations easier. Once you've learned that, you'll be able to figure out what to do within seconds. That'll come in handy when you don't have much time. I'll show you." Rebecca listened to his explanation, and her eyes lit up. "That's amazing!" She had forgotten he was so close to her, and she turned her head to say something, only to brush her lips against his. She wanted to pull back, but Kyle drew her closer and kissed her. Her heart began to beat faster, and she put one hand against his chest. She felt his taut muscles under her shirt as he pressed his mouth against hers. His kiss was soft and sensual, making her body tremble. Rebecca felt nervous because they were still standing in the hallway, and it would be easy for someone to see them. She was about to push him away when her phone beeped, and she took the opportunity to break free from his embrace. He sighed as he came back to his senses and chuckled softly. "I couldn't resist kissing you." Her ears turned red, and her cheeks were warm. She glared at him and took her phone out of her pocket as she returned to her room. Jacqueline had sent her a message with the video of their last rehearsal. "Tell us what you think. I'll teach you the steps later." Rebecca was about to reply when Kyle walked into the room. He noticed a smile on her face. "Who's that?" She raised her eyebrows. "Oh, it's just a message from Jacqueline." Kyle had heard the name before and remembered who it was. "The soldier from the engineering squad?" Rebecca narrowed her eyes. "I thought you said you didn't know who she was, or her name for that matter. How did you know which squad she's in?" Kyle shrugged with confusion. "Someone told me. Why are you sending her a message?" Rebecca saw it as an opportunity to tease him. She pouted and blinked. "She has the hots for you and wanted to know if you like anything special. I don't mind telling her so that she can get it for you as a gift." Kyle frowned and his face darkened. "What on earth are you talking about? Why would you do that?" Rebecca didn't take him seriously and continued to joke with him. "She's a nice girl and quite pretty as well. She dances and sings beautifully and can also do backflips. I think you'd find her..." But before she could finish speaking, Kyle strode into the room and grabbed her around the waist. Her eyes went wide, and his actions surprised her. "What are you doing?" He didn't say anything. Instead, he lifted her with his strong arms, flung her onto the bed, and pressed his body against hers. Rebecca hadn't seen Kyle so forceful before, and she wanted to push him away, but he was too strong. He pressed her against the mattress and looked at her furiously. It was as if a dark thundercloud had gathered over him. The atmosphere suddenly became tense, like the calm before the storm. Rebecca pursed her lips and realized some jokes weren't funny, especially not to him. She scrunched her face and tried to look away when Kyle leaned closer and kissed her forehead. His touch was light and gentle, leaving her speechless. She hadn't expected him to do that. He stared into her eyes and spoke in a whisper. "Becky, don't make jokes like that. I don't appreciate you wanting to set me up with another woman. I only like you. I always have, and I only want to be with you. Are you trying to hurt my feelings?" Rebecca felt her chest tighten, and she suddenly felt awful. He kissed her forehead again. "I've said it before. I won't force you to do anything you don't want to do." She blinked and looked at him with wide eyes. He released his grip on her shoulders and rolled over. He took her into his arms and twirled a loose strand of her hair around his fingers. "It seems like you still have some growing up to do. I'll wait for you." She lay in his arms and listened to his heartbeat. She smiled softly and thought about being in love with him. She knew love was impulsive, but she had now learned that impulsivity was also limited and that she had to work on restraining herself. Kyle hugged her and nuzzled his face against her neck, when suddenly, he let go and sat up. He quickly placed a pillow on his lap. Rebecca gawked at him, puzzled. He was sitting on the edge of her bed, clutching a giant pink pillow shaped like a rabbit. A mischievous glint appeared in her eyes as she looked at him, and her lips curled into a smile. She pulled her phone out of her pocket and took a photo of him. Kyle didn't react and sat dead still as he calmly watched her take the photo. She took another 2 shots and inches to the foot of the bed to get his whole body into the frame. In the photo, Kyle was sitting upright and glaring at the camera. He was wearing his military fatigues and had a giant pink rabbit on his lap. The rabbit had large eyes and long ears, and it looked cute. The scene was too funny for Rebecca, and she giggled as she squirmed back up the bed to lean against him. She showed him the photo and laughed. "You're so funny. Sometimes you can be tough, and other times you're so cute." Kyle took a deep breath. He had just composed himself, but having Rebecca drape over him made everything worse. Rebecca swiped through the photos, oblivious to her effect on him. Kyle's Adam's apple bobbed as he focused on his self-control and resisted the urge to kiss her again. He glared at her. "Officer Davis, I order you to leave your room immediately and practice tying knots." At first, Rebecca thought he was joking, but when she saw the serious look in his eyes, she jumped up. "Yes, Captain." She hurried out of the room and rummaged through the box of equipment in the hallway until she found a coil of rope to use. Kyle remained seated on the bed and took a few deep breaths. He put the rabbit pillow back against the headboard and stood up. Making sure Rebecca couldn't see him, he walked over to the window and continued to take deep breaths until he regained his composure and his lust for her had subsided. Rebecca practiced all the knot-tying techniques she had been taught and waited for Kyle to inspect her efforts. He eventually came out of her room and silently demonstrated a new method. She wrapped and twisted the rope a few times until she got it right, and then Kyle taught her how to pick a lock with a thin metal wire. She had seen TV shows where characters would open doors using nothing but a credit card or a piece of wire, and she was very excited to learn how to do it herself. Kyle showed her several other handy tricks until it was lunchtime. He packed the equipment back into the box. "Let's go to the canteen." Rebecca nodded and was walking with him toward the canteen when her phone rang. She glanced at the name on the screen and saw that it was her mom, so she quickly answered. Nancy sounded worried. "I've just seen your message. I hope your mission isn't somewhere dangerous." "Mom, I've only just started. They won't send me on a dangerous mission yet. I'm going to a high-security biomanufacturing facility. I won't be able to contact you or Dad once I'm there, but I'll call you before I leave. Nancy sighed. Okay, but please be careful. I wanted to tell you that your dad has identified someone who might be Callum. I'll send you the details. Rebecca chatted to Nancy about a few trivial things before she hung up. As she walked into the canteen, her phone beeped, and she saw an email from Nancy. She opened it and skimmed through the document. Her eyes went wide when she saw the name Chester. The document was an investigation report that Jonathan had put together. Chester was 20 years old and had been born in America. He had been abroad for a long time and had recently shown up in Bolivia, but there were no records of him entering or exiting the country. The smart private eye also hadn't captured any traces of him at the airport. Rebecca found it strange and couldn't think of an explanation. She recalled when she had been in Ecuador and had seen a man who she had been sure was Callum. She handed her phone to Kyle. Take a look at this. It's a report about the guy I chased after who I thought was Callum. Kyle read the report and frowned. That's odd. I'll ask some of my colleagues over there to keep an eye out for him and let me know as soon as they see him. Rebecca nodded. It's too much of a coincidence that he was in Ecuador. Kyle was puzzled. It doesn't make sense. If it was Callum, he would have recognized you, but he didn't. Did you notice anything strange about him? She shook her head. It genuinely seemed like he had no idea who I was. Apart from that, he seemed quite normal. He rubbed his chin as he thought. I've heard about a drug that makes people forget their past. It only affects the mind. We'll probably be able to find out more about it at the facility in Chile. Her eyes lit up. Yeah, that's a great idea. The facility is one of the leaders in that field. If such a thing exists, it's bound to be on their database. Kyle handed her phone back. You can snoop around, but you have to be careful and don't do anything rash. The situation's complicated, and I don't want to jeopardize our mission. She sighed. Yeah, I know. Just wish I could find him. They ate their meal in silence as Rebecca thought about Chester and Callum. That evening, they finished packing their gear and went to bed, ready for their private flight to Chile the following morning. Because they had weapons and high-tech equipment, they landed at a secret airport and took underground tunnels to reach the main road leading to an oasis town in the desert. The military had prearranged everything, and they arrived in the town using their undercover aliases. Rebecca's alias was Becca Zaris, and Kyle was Kylan Murphy. Their backstories also had to be legitimate. So, Rebecca's resume stated that she was a 21-year-old graduate who had just completed her degree in biology. She had achieved excellent grades and had been recommended to her internship at the facility. Kylan was a 23-year-old graduate with experience as a lab assistant at his university's biology department, and he had been appointed to work alongside Becca as a lab assistant. The military had already planted a team of undercover specialists in the facility. Rebecca and Kyle didn't need to have relevant knowledge about the field because the specialists were there to cover for them. But, to make their aliases more foolproof, Kyle and Rebecca had spent considerable time memorizing the basics so they wouldn't raise suspicions. The facility had sent a helicopter to meet them at the nearby town. Rebecca gasped in awe as the helicopter circled over the facility before landing. The front of the building had a large glass dome and was built out of state-of-the-art materials. The roof tiles were made of hexagon-shaped solar panels that supplied electricity to the entire facility. After landing, Kyle and Rebecca were escorted to a reception desk on the first floor. A young receptionist greeted them politely and asked to see their identification tags. The identification tags had been prepared beforehand, and the receptionist quickly confirmed their details before returning them. Just show your tags to the security guards at the double doors, and they'll let you in. Walk down the hallway until you reach the third door on your left. Rebecca looked out of the thick glazed windows and watched a few people mill about outside. She sighed softly, considering its modern design and build. The facility must have cost a fortune. She knew the profits gained by developing biological agents for the civil and military markets were sky high. They found the Human Resources office and handed over their paperwork. The administrator behind the desk processed their paperwork and handed them a folder and access tags. You have to get your access tags activated. The office is at the end of the hallway on the right-hand side. After sorting out their access tags, Rebecca and Kyle returned to the first office to receive instructions on what to do next. The administrator flipped through a file and smiled politely. Someone will be here shortly to take you for a tour of the facility and introduce you to your department manager. We have a 2-day training program that you have to complete before you can start working. A skinny, serious-looking woman greeted them before leading them down a different hallway. A series of locked doors separated other areas of the building, and they had to swipe their access cards often. They took an elevator to the 5th floor, and Rebecca's eyes lit up as she gazed at the pristine workspace. The large room was spacious and bright, and everyone had a designated working area. The desks were a shiny silver color, and the chairs were transparent, making everything seem clean and tidy. The woman gestured toward a man sitting behind a desk. This is your department manager, Dr. Lyle Shananahan. He's been in this field of research for the past 7 years. Dr. Shananahan also received his first national award this year. Rebecca gazed at the man wearing a white lab coat. He looked very young, and she immediately wondered when he had graduated and if he had been working there for 7 years. Dr. Shananahan stood up when he saw them enter. He was slightly shorter than Kyle and had a pale complexion. His skin was smooth and flawless. He was handsome, with dark hair and delicate facial features. Rebecca thought about how she had teased Kyle that she would meet and fall in love with an attractive scientist at the facility. It was almost too unbelievable. She looked at the handsome scientist and speculated if he had developed a unique product that gave him such perfect skin. She imagined herself asking him what he used, and her thoughts drifted away. She snapped back to reality when she heard Kyle introduce himself. I'm pleased to meet you, Dr. Shananahan. My name is Kylan Murphy. I'm the new lab assistant. Rebecca smiled politely. Hello, Dr. Shananahan. I'm Becca Zaris. I'm joining your team as an intern. Dr. Shananahan smiled and revealed a set of perfect white teeth. His voice was as alluring as his appearance. He shook their hands. Welcome. I look forward to working with you. Our work here is very important, and I'm sure you'll make me proud. Rebecca glanced at his hands. Unlike Kyle's hands, there were no calluses or scars. Instead, his slender fingers were smooth, and his palms were soft. Dr. Shananahan welcomed Kyle and Rebecca to the team. Now, let me introduce you to the rest of the team before I show you around the laboratory. He cleared his throat, and the other people in the office stopped what they were doing. Everyone, I'd like to introduce you to some new team members. Rebecca had been working with men ever since she joined the Air Force Academy, and most of them had been a little rough around the edges. But Dr. Shananahan's voice was soft and gentle, and there was something about it and his smooth hands that she found attractive. As she gazed at him, she could feel Kyle's eyes boring into her, and she glanced briefly at his face. His expression was blank, but she could detect a hint of jealousy in his eyes. She turned away and tried to hide the smile on her face. He's jealous of the good doctor. How funny. The other team members walked over to the new arrivals, and Rebecca tried to gauge their personalities. One looked a little dull, while another looked friendly, and something was sinister looking about one man. Dr. Shananahan introduced Rebecca and Kyle to the group, and then he asked the others to introduce themselves. The only other woman in the room stepped forward. She had short blonde hair and looked like an approachable person. Rebecca guessed she was probably in her early 30s. Hi, my name's Roma Jefferson. I'm currently researching the best methods to extract medicinal properties from plants. The young man, who Rebecca thought looked like he wasn't yet 30, pushed his glasses up high onto his nose and sniffed. I'm Jeremy Wyatt. I'm in charge of purification and the data tests of various reagents. And I'm Ken Chung. The man looked to be in his late 30s. I'm in charge of chemical reagents, including comparing their differences. The fourth person stepped forward. My name is Roberto Diaz. Roberto was in his 40s and had a long mustache that curled up at the ends. Rebecca thought he looked like a character from an old-fashioned murder mystery movie. I'm in charge of clinical trials. Dr. Shananahan appeared to be the second youngest member of the team, and Rebecca wondered what he had done to earn the respect of his older peers and become their leader at such a young age. Once the introductions were done, Dr. Shananahan told the others to return to their jobs, and he took Rebecca and Kyle to the laboratory. There are 2 more team members. You'll meet them in a while. Our research team is currently working on the Neurological Regeneration Project. I'm assuming you've heard of it? Rebecca nodded. Of course, yes. And what will Kylan and I be doing, Dr. Shananahan? The team has recently entered the clinical research and development stage, and soon there'll be a lot of experiments and data analysis to be done. Based on your resumes, I'm assigning you to the role of experimental assistant, and Kylan will be working on data analysis. Rebecca and Kyle had no objections to that, and they both nodded. Kyle was an excellent pilot, but he knew nothing about biological experimentation. Rebecca, on the other hand, had been conducting experiments with Helga ever since she was a small child. She knew that she would be handling much more sophisticated equipment at the laboratory, but she imagined the procedures would be similar. As they made their way around, they encountered the 2 other team members that Dr. Shananahan had mentioned, 1 female and 1 male. The man was busy studying something through a microscope, and the woman was in the middle of a chemical reaction test. They were so engrossed in their work that Dr. Shananahan decided not to disturb them. Rebecca noticed that the instruments they were using looked highly professional, as she had expected. She also saw that they had been thoroughly disinfected after each use, for which the technicians had to wear isolation suits, special masks, and gloves. Once they had had a good look around, Dr. Shananahan gave them 2 information packs each and left them to read up on the project they would be working on. Later that afternoon, the personnel department gave them some inauguration training, and then they were given time to get familiar with the way things were done at the base. Then, they were free to familiarize themselves with the building's layout, including the staff accommodation area. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, in a room filled with exercise equipment, Callum had just completed the day's training. Wiping sweat from his face with a towel, he went to get himself a bottle of water, but then he stopped abruptly in his tracks. The pain in Callum's head was intense. It came from deep inside his brain and was so severe that he was unable to take another step. Afraid that he would fall, he crouched down low, held his aching head tightly between his hands, and leaned against the wall. He waited for the pain to pass. But wave after wave of pain continued to envelop him. It was unbearable, and the sweat oozed out of his pores until his entire body was dripping, and the veins in his temples were bulging. He collapsed onto the ground and writhed around in agony. The smooth concrete floor was soon darkened with the sweat that was pooling around his body. The pain lasted for a good 10 minutes before it eventually started to subside. Callum remained unconscious on the floor with his eyes closed. Just then, the door opened, and the man in the black cloak entered. He looked down at Callum, but he clearly had no intention of helping him up. Instead, he kicked him with the tip of his boot to get him to move. Callum's clothes were soaked in sweat, and when the cloaked man pushed him aside, he could see that his hair was also wet. His face was pale, and the man frowned. "At least there's no blood." The man in the cloak crouched down and put 2 fingers against the side of Callum's neck. He felt a pulse, so he knew that he wasn't dead. He stood up and stared down at the unconscious body on the floor. Without looking up, he spoke to someone who had followed him into the room. "Get the doctor to check him out. Find out what's going on." "Yes, sir." Not long afterward, Callum was carried away and taken to an examination room where he was examined by a doctor. Another half-hour passed before someone reported back to the cloaked man. "Sir, Chester's body is fine, but there seems to be something wrong with his brain." "What do you mean?" "His brain waves are all over the place. The doctor says the nerves in his brain have been affected by the drugs we gave him, which puts the whole operation at risk." The man in the cloak looked angrily at the messenger. "Is he brain dead?" "Not yet, but the doctor said that if he keeps having extreme headaches, it might eventually damage his brain irreparably. He said it's better to ask the clinics for new reagents to be developed." If he becomes brain dead, he'll be useless to us. He gestured for the messenger to leave. Tell the doctor I'll think about it. Callum remained in a coma the whole of the following day. The cloakman ordered the doctor to inject a nutrient solution into him. Send him to Chile. The doctor nodded, and then he ordered a porter to wheel in a special container that he had prepared earlier. Then, 2 other men lifted Callum and placed him inside the container. The box had a special vent that would allow him to breathe for long periods. We'll be at the research base in a day. The doctor ordered one of the men to place the lid over the container, and then they placed the box inside a transportation crate. There were other similar crates in the room, so on the face of it, there was nothing unusual about the one containing Callum. The chests were loaded on a truck and taken out to a waiting aircraft. They were wheeled up into the airplane, ready to be transported to Chile. Rebecca and Kyle were busy working in the research lab. Kyle was sitting at a computer, sorting test data. Once sorted, it had to be checked and rechecked before it could be put into a report. He had been working at the computer for days, and he was beginning to feel restless. Desk jobs were not for him. On the other side of the lab, Rebecca and Roma were conducting experiments. Roma was completing the final extraction while Rebecca helped her. She was quick and efficient, and Roma was pleased with her progress. On one particular day, Rebecca was so busy that she didn't have a chance to speak to Kyle all day. Even at lunchtime, all they could do was nod to each other across the room. Later that day, Rebecca took off her insulation suit in the dressing room outside the laboratory and returned to her desk. She took out her laptop and began to record a summary of the day's work. On the desk opposite her, Dr. Shananahan was busy typing something on his computer. The only sound that could be heard was the tapping of keys. When Rebecca had finished, she got up to leave and nearly bumped into an intelligent-looking man in his early 30s in the doorway. The man was Shane Becker, the person she had seen looking down a microscope on her first day. She had since learned that he was responsible for the extraction of plant reagents. Shane greeted her with a smile. Hey, Becca. Have you had dinner yet? A friend of mine sent me some local specialties from my hometown. Would you like to join me? Thanks, Shane. That's really kind of you, but I already have dinner sorted. But I have chili sauce. Shane wasn't going to let her go that easily. It's a family recipe, and since I heard you like spicy food, I thought you might like to try some. Rebecca didn't want to reject him outright, so she smiled obligingly. Okay, in that case, how can I refuse? They took the elevator down to the ground floor together and headed toward the accommodation building, which was a 10-minute walk from the base. Just as they arrived downstairs, they heard the roar of a jet engine and saw a small cargo plane land on the landing strip in the distance. It was the first time Rebecca had noticed any activity on the runway, and Shane saw the puzzled look on her face. We have no resources here, so we have to get goods transported every month. We rely almost entirely on air transportation. She nodded, and they continued on their way, passing the aircraft that had just landed. Rebecca watched as a truck traveled along the tarmac to meet the airplane, and workmen began to unload large wooden boxes from the cargo hold. Rebecca and Shane continued to watch the wooden boxes being removed from the plane and loaded onto the truck. So, Shane, what kind of animals are used in the clinical trials here? Rebecca had visited biological pharmaceutical centers in the U.S., and it was mainly mice that were used for testing. But so far, she had seen very few animals of any sort at the lab. We mainly use mice, but we also use rabbits occasionally. I thought so, but I just haven't seen any around. They're kept in another lab. You'll be privy to more info when you go from a level D to a level B. He glanced at her through the corner of his eye. The staff accommodation here is really well soundproofed. You never hear the planes, even though it's so close to the airstrip. Rebecca didn't respond. She was thinking about the lack of small animals in the lab. And why did Shane seem so eager to change the subject? She wondered, what if it is not mice and rabbits they're using here, but humans instead? Colonel Hunter had never mentioned it, and Rebecca had no real reason to doubt him, but she couldn't help thinking that something was amiss. If there was a spy in their midst, There might be more than one. When they reached the dorm rooms, Shane told Rebecca to wait for him by the elevator while he went and got the bottle of chili sauce for her. He soon returned with the sauce, and she thanked him with a polite smile, and then she headed toward her own room. Once within the relative safety of her room, she decided to test the chili sauce. The place was filled with experts in bio-brewing, and she couldn't risk eating any food that was given to her. She first scooped out a spoonful of the sauce and used her own method to test it. Once she was happy it hadn't been poisoned, she put it aside. Fortunately, she had brought her own bottle of chili sauce, so she poured Shane's down the sink, washed the bottle, and refilled it with her own sauce. Only then did she feel a sense of relief. Soon after she had finished her task, she received a message from Kyle inviting her out to dinner. She freshened up, changed her clothes, and went to meet him. When she arrived at the main building, Rebecca saw some of the large boxes being carried into the warehouse. The delivery men all had visitor permits pinned to their shirts and seemed to be familiar with the layout of the place. Rebecca found Kyle in the on-site restaurant. He had already ordered food. She placed her order and sat opposite him. She had taken the chili sauce with her, and she showed it to him. "Want some of this on your meal?" He looked quizzically at the packaging. "Houston." In a low voice, Rebecca explained what had happened. "When you looked at all that data, did you see what animals were used for the experiments?" Kyle shook his head. "I'm only a D. I only see D-level data." Rebecca sighed with frustration. In the Williams household, Oliver received a phone call. "All right, I understand. I'll do it myself." He hung up and frowned. It was Friday, and Reggie, who didn't have any classes that afternoon, had gone to the company offices. He had been busy with the family business recently, but he was somehow managing to juggle both the business and his college studies. As Oliver was putting his phone away, he saw his son standing in the doorway with a bundle of documents in his arms. He waved at him. "Come in, Reggie." Reggie went in and put the documents down on his father's desk. "I've been looking into what you asked me to investigate." Oliver flicked through the papers. "I have to go to Chile tomorrow." Reggie nodded. He knew that because of his father's brain tumor, he had been investing in the medical field for several years. A few years earlier, Oliver had had business dealings with a biological research center in Chile, which was being funded by the United States. Reggie thought he might like to visit Chile. "Can you take me with you?" "Why would you want to go?" "I'd like to take a look around. My first-year subjects are pretty easy, so it won't matter too much if I miss a few days. I'll easily catch up." Oliver considered his son's request. "I don't think it's a good idea, Reggie. Tensions are rising again over there, and I heard war might break out at any moment. Although the base is in the desert and not near the border, it still might be dangerous." Reggie groaned. "But Dad, when you were 18 years old, you were fully independent. If you never let me go anywhere, how am I going to build the confidence to run the family business one day?" Oliver was impressed with his son's reasoning, and he couldn't argue with it. "Fair enough. You can come." Reggie punched the air excitedly, and then he went back to his desk to start organizing himself for his trip. The following day, he and Oliver boarded a plane for Chile. Rebecca was busy all day. She found that there were several laboratories at the base, and each one was labeled alphabetically. As a D-level employee, she could enter no lab above a C level, which was frustrating because all the clinical laboratories were B or A level. She knew that she would have to bide her time until she was promoted, which meant she would have to keep doing her work diligently. She was good at her job, and her colleagues liked her, so it was only a matter of time. As for Kyle, he had never done such a mundane job in his life. Every day, he stared at a computer screen and processed data. And because there was so much to process, he often worked late into the evening. On that particular day, he was working late again. Rebecca ate in the canteen without him, and by nightfall, Kyle was still working. For the sake of the employees' physical and mental health, a sports field and gym were available for use, and Rebecca decided she would go and check them out. She watched some people playing football for a few minutes, and then she went inside the sports center to the gym. She found a step machine and began to work out. After a while, She looked around the room and noticed her colleague Jeremy walking in her direction. Other than her, he was the youngest member of her team, but he was the least friendly. He saw Rebecca, but he ignored her and went straight to the treadmill. She pulled a face behind his back and said nothing as she walked past him and out of the building. At that point, she still had no idea who the mole was. As she left the gym, she saw a young man smoking in a corner. It was unusual to see people smoking near a gym, and she stared at him. Her eyes widened in surprise when she recognized his face. It was Reggie. What on earth is he doing here? And when did he start smoking? Is it him, or am I seeing things? Reggie was just as surprised to see Rebecca as she was to see him. In a fluster, he choked on the smoke from his cigarette and dropped the butt to the ground, stamping on it in a vain attempt to hide it. Rebecca watched as he coughed, and she realized that it really was him. Because of the covert operation she was involved in, she couldn't go and greet him. Instead, she pretended she didn't know him. "I don't usually smoke," Reggie said. "I only do it occasionally." It was only in the past few months that he had taken up the habit. He wasn't addicted, and he wasn't really sure why he did it. He thought it might have been to fill the hole when he felt low. The buzz he got from that first inhalation made him feel at ease. His father and sister didn't know about his smoking, and that was why he hadn't wanted Rebecca to see him with a cigarette. He looked at her anxiously. "I haven't seen you around here before," Rebecca said. "I'm Becca Zaris." Then she took a step closer to him and lowered her voice in case she was overheard. "I'm undercover. I have to pretend not to know you." Then she spoke up again. "You want to know where the canteen is? Take the elevator from here to the second floor." Reggie understood what she meant, and he nodded and looked into her eyes. "Thank you so much." Rebecca turned and walked away. He followed her with his eyes for a moment, and then he headed into the building with a wry smile on his face. Rebecca returned to her room and took a shower. As she was drying her hair, she received a text from Kyle. "Hey, Becky, I just got off work." She felt sorry for him, working such long hours. "They work you too hard. It's not good to stare at a computer all day. You don't want to get impaired vision, or you won't be able to fly a plane anymore." "Don't worry. We'll have completed this mission within a month." "Have you found anything?" Rebecca was hopeful. "Yes. Get some sleep, and when I get a chance, I'll come to your room and give you the details." Later that night, Rebecca awoke with a start when she felt a movement beside her on the bed. She opened her eyes and felt a surge of fear when she saw a dark shape. "It's okay. It's only me." It was Kyle. She heaved a sigh of relief. "Why are you here so late?" "I found a way to block the base signal and connect with another satellite signal. I asked Colonel Hunter to send me an unlocking system, and I've just downloaded it." "Will it unlock the laboratory that we don't have access to?" "Yes." Kyle could hardly contain his excitement. The laboratory lock was no ordinary lock. It was made up of a high-tech combination of passwords and fingerprints. Once it was forcefully unlocked, it would instantly connect to the base's alarm system. When the alarm system was activated, all the doors in the base would be sealed. The whole process took a matter of seconds, so it was impossible to escape safely once the alarm was activated. "Are you sure it'll work?" Rebecca didn't feel as confident as Kyle. "I'm going to try it out, but I'm not going to sneak around. It'll be best to do everything where everyone can see me, so that they think I accidentally walked into the wrong place." "But what happens if you manage to gain access to the lab in front of everyone? Wouldn't that expose you?" "No. The system has a secondary confirmation. If I confirm the code, it'll open immediately. I'll just check that it works, but I won't open it." "Okay, that makes me feel a little better." Then, Rebecca remembered her earlier encounter. "Oh, when I came out of the gym today, I saw Reggie. I have no idea what he's here for." "He's probably here to talk business with his father. I've been analyzing the data for the clients in the outer circle, and his name came up." He frowned. "I hope they don't expose us. Maybe I should take some precautionary measures." "No need. He won't expose us. I've spoken to him. As for his father, his family already owes us. If they do anything, My father won't let them get away with it. I'm sure his dad won't make any stupid mistakes. You seem to know them well. I've known Reggie since I was a child, so yeah, I guess I know him quite well. But there was a hidden danger that she didn't yet know about. I'm beginning to wish I had gone to school with you too. Kyle's voice in the darkness sounded pitiful. Rebecca sat up straight in bed and leaned against the headboard. Kyle sat beside her. In the darkness, their breathing seemed loud and became intertwined. Yeah, I really wish we'd gone to school together too. Kyle couldn't tell if she was making fun of him or if she really meant it. As Rebecca was stifling a laugh, he turned to her and lifted her chin. His fingertips were warm, but again, she noticed the roughness of his skin. She was reminded of the softness of Dr. Shenanahan's hand when she had shaken it on their first day at the lab. It was in stark contrast to Kyle's. As if he knew what she was thinking, Kyle broke her thoughts. Hey, Becky, didn't you say you wanted to fall in love with a handsome doctor here? Oh, don't worry. He's not quite as handsome as you. She smiled coyly. And now your old classmate has turned up too. Don't worry about him. I'm pretending not to know him, so I won't be going near him. I can't believe this guy. He's jealous of everyone. And we've barely had a chance to speak for the past 2 days. He sounded pitiful again. Have you missed me? Kyle felt her breathing tighten and her heart skipped a beat. She felt that no matter how she answered his question, it would probably be wrong. She pursed her lips and pretended to think about it. A little. Well, a little is enough for me. He chuckled, and then he planted a gentle kiss on her lips. She had been expecting him to make some kind of move, and she was ready for it. They were alone in her bed in the darkness after all. She waited to see what he was going to do next, and soon enough, he took her into his arms and held her closer. He ran his fingers through her soft hair, and their kiss became more and more passionate. All Rebecca's thoughts disappeared from her mind, and she lost herself in his kiss. She could feel her blood heating up, and her previously tense body softened. The darkness of the night and the welcoming softness of her bed were enough to almost make them lose control. Kyle wanted more. His restraint fought valiantly against his emotions until he thought that his body was going to explode. He suddenly let go of Rebecca as if her skin had burned his hands, and he jumped off the bed. Rebecca felt dizzy from their kiss, and it took her a moment to realize what had happened. The air rushed into her lungs and brought her back to her senses as she looked at Kyle, who was standing at the end of the bed with his head in his hands. Why are you only 18 years old, Becky? His voice was despondent and desperate. And you're such an old man. Kyle was 22, and it was the first time anyone had described him as old. He laughed and threw his hands into the air in a gesture of surrender. I'm going to make sure I find a way to see you every day from now on. I can't go on like this. I can't keep holding it in. Rebecca smirked at the thought of him being so pent up with emotions for her, but she didn't say anything. To take his mind off matters, he changed the subject and brought it back to their covert mission. Don't do anything for now. I'll let you know when I have a result. And don't talk to Reggie or Dr. Shenanahan. Just because he's clean-cut, it doesn't mean he actually is. Rebecca smirked again. He's such a jealous guy. Kyle peered at Rebecca in the dark room and shook his head before leaving quietly, closing the door behind him. Rebecca stretched out her hand and caught the musky fragrance of Kyle's cologne on her pillowcase. The scent made her giddy and flushed, but it was also comforting. She sighed, closed her eyes, and fell asleep. Rebecca woke up early the following day and ate breakfast. She was half an hour early for work, but she went to the office and had planned to catch up on some paperwork when she saw the cleaning lady carrying a large box. She took a mint from a small glass dish on the table and gave it to the cleaner. Do you need some help? It's a big box. I don't think you'll be able to take it downstairs alone. The cleaner liked Rebecca. She had always found the pretty young woman to be polite and friendly. It's okay, thank you. I'm used to hauling large boxes. It's a pity I can't resell them, though. They're just too big. Rebecca smiled. Yeah, I'm sure you could get quite a bit of money with all those boxes that we have here. She casually stacked a pile of documents on her desk. Why do we have such large boxes in any case? I can't think of what we might need at a lab that comes in such a big box. Isn't it for the logistics department? The cleaner shook her head. I can't say, but we occasionally get them. Maybe this one was used to transport some experiments. Rebecca shrugged and returned to organizing her desk. If there had been something to do with experiments in the box, she was certain the box would have been stored in a climate-controlled and secure storage area. The box in question had arrived by plane the day before. Shane had said the plane delivered supplies. He hadn't mentioned that it brought anything for the labs. But she had seen porters delivering some boxes to one of the high-security labs. Rebecca guessed it was most likely a test subject for one of the clinical experiments conducted in the lab. She was suspicious about the size and shape of the box because it was long and narrow, perfect for a human to fit in. She shrugged at the thought of it. She glanced at the doors leading to the high-security lab. There was no way of getting in without having special access permissions. Rebecca had spent the morning assisting Ken in the lab. It was midday, and she had completed her tasks, and Ken had taken a phone call. Ken hung up the phone and walked over to her. Becca, I need some assistance with a demonstration for some clients. She immediately thought of Oliver and Reggie. Sure, that sounds exciting. She wondered what sort of experiment they would be doing. She asked Ken about it as they walked down the long hallway toward the demonstration lab. Is the experiment difficult? Ken shook his head. He was middle-aged, slightly plump, and always looked serious. No, it's quite simple. Roma says you're competent, so just follow my instructions and it'll be fine. They arrived at the demonstration lab. There was a comfortable lounge with couches and refreshments on a small trolley. A large window separated the lounge from a state-of-the-art lab. Oliver and Reggie sat on a couch while they waited for Ken and Rebecca to arrive. Rebecca expected that Reggie had told his father about her. Oliver greeted her politely as if she were a stranger. She secretly sighed with relief and shook his hand. Reggie sized her up, as if seeing her for the first time. Because she was pretty, it didn't seem odd for the young man to check her out. Ken chatted with the sales director and gestured for Rebecca to begin the experiment in the lab. She was wearing a white lab coat, and she put on a pair of latex gloves, a mask, and safety goggles, making her look very professional. Reggie gazed at her and thought about what she had once said to him. The incident with Callum had widened the rift between them, and she had told him she never wanted to see him again. Following Ken's instructions, she poured a dirty-looking liquid into a test tube and added a drop of another liquid using a pipette. Ken explained the chemical reaction taking place inside the test tube. As you can see, the chemical agent in the pipette is altering the state of the liquid in the test tube. The chemical agent can change the property of the waste matter in the test tube and purify the liquid. Oliver nodded. Very good. Can you explain the principle to me? He turned to look at Reggie. Why don't you go in and let the lab assistant show you how to use the chemical agent? I'm sure you'll find it very interesting. Reggie didn't expect Oliver to insist to go over to Rebecca. Reggie knew that she was undercover and didn't want to expose her. And Callum's disappearance had complicated things between them. His chest tightened in anticipation at the thought of spending time with her. He put on a white lab coat and the same safety gear as Rebecca and entered the lab. Please, will you show me how to do it? Rebecca nodded and picked up a soiled ball of cotton wool with a pair of tweezers. She placed the cotton wool into a glass dish. You can use the water in the glass container. Pour a little over the cotton wool until it has absorbed everything. Then, add a drop of the chemical agent, and you'll see a result within 2 minutes. Reggie eagerly did as she instructed. He stood beside her but didn't make eye contact. Instead, he glanced at her wrist. He felt a wave of sadness as he remembered the bracelet he had once given her and the softness of her skin as he put it around her wrist. After 2 minutes, he lifted the glass container to show Rebecca the results. She looked up at him, and their eyes met. Without skipping a beat, she began to explain more about the solution. Although it is an advanced formula, it is easy to use. The chemicals in the formula react to the molecules in the water. Her eyes shone as she explained how the formula worked, and Reggie listened carefully. His breathing quickened, and he could smell the faint fragrance of her perfume. "Yeah, I understand. Thank you." When she was finished, she smiled. "Do you have any other questions?" He shook his head. "No, it makes sense to me." She nodded and started to pack the equipment away. Reggie politely offered to help and set about rinsing the pipettes for her. Watching them through the large window, the sales director smiled. "Your son seems quite willing to be involved. That's a rare trait nowadays." Oliver's eyes sparkled with pride. "Yeah, he's a curious boy and has a keen interest in science and the family business. He insisted on coming when I told him I wanted to visit your facility." Oliver watched how Reggie gazed at Rebecca and sighed. He had suspected that his son had a crush on the girl who had rescued him in Martinique, but he had never expected her to be Rebecca Davis. It was difficult for him to see his son fall in love with someone he wasn't supposed to. There was nothing worse than forbidden love. He thought that if they found Callum, Reggie would have a chance with her and maybe their relationship would end the feud between their families. He wouldn't object if Reggie wanted to date her. He wasn't sure how Jonathan would react, but he was sure he could sort something out. But Callum was still missing. He had disappeared without a trace, and despite his and Jonathan's combined efforts, they had had very little success tracing reliable leads. The situation reminded Oliver of his past, and the way Reggie gazed at Rebecca made him think back to when he had once been in love. He decided to do whatever he could to help Reggie get together with Rebecca. Rebecca handed Reggie a few test tubes to pack away into a test tube rack. Oliver noticed his son's lips curl into a smile he hadn't seen since Callum had disappeared. Rebecca wiped the table with a soft cloth and smiled at Reggie. "Thank you for helping. You're a client, and you really didn't have to." Reggie shrugged and glanced at her hands. She had removed her gloves, and he noticed a scar from a wound that must have recently healed. Rebecca's light complexion and skin were soft, so the scar stood out. He recalled Layla saying that Rebecca had gone to Ecuador a while back and wondered if she had hurt herself there. He felt a buzz in his heart when she spoke to him, but he maintained his composure. "There's no need to thank me. Didn't have much else to do, and I enjoyed the demonstration. It's interesting." Ken thanked Rebecca and told her she was allowed to return to her regular duties. She nodded and greeted Oliver and Reggie before leaving. Rebecca closed the door of the demonstration lab and almost bumped into Roberto in the hallway. He was the oldest member of their team and was already in his early 40s. Roberto gave her the creeps, and she felt her hair stand on end as he spoke to her. "Just a word of warning, Becca. I noticed how the client's son looked at you. You'd better watch out for him." She shuddered, not because of what he said, but because of how uncomfortable he made her feel. She pursed her lips and held her head high. "Thank you, Roberto. I appreciate your concern." As she turned to walk away, she heard his deep, throaty laugh. It had a sinister ring to it and made her feel uneasy. Rebecca swiped her access tag and entered the lab. She sat behind her desk and told herself to calm down. Her encounter with Roberto had unsettled her, and she felt anxious. She had been in many dangerous situations that had frightened her, such as bullets whizzing past her and the landslide after the earthquake. But there was something about Roberto that had terrified her. She tried to focus on her work as her thoughts raced. She didn't hear Dr. Shananahan call her until he raised his voice to get her attention. She quickly stood up and hurried over to him. "My apologies, Dr. Shananahan. Were you looking for me?" His lips curled into a friendly smile, and he spoke in a gentle and soft voice. "Becca, I can't leave the lab right now, but I promised to send a box of equipment to one of the high-security labs. Roberto is waiting for it. Please be a dear and take it up for me, please." She felt a chill run down her spine at the thought of having to see Roberto again, but she didn't want to miss the opportunity to get close to the high-security lab. She hoped that she would be able to take a peek through the doors when Roberto opened them. Smiling, she took the box from Dr. Shananahan. "Of course. I'll go right now. I won't be long." The high-security lab was situated on the top floor of the building and was managed by a different team of scientists. She took the elevator and was surprised to find the lab deserted, apart from Roberto waiting for her. She handed him the box. "Dr. Shananahan asked me to give this to you." He glanced at her with piercing eyes. "Thanks." Rebecca looked over his shoulder and noticed a large sealed box. It looked similar to the box she had seen the cleaner throwing out earlier that morning. A small section of the box had been torn open, as if the box had been used as a makeshift trash can. Her heart sank, and she wondered if the box was the same as the one she'd seen outside the other high-security lab the previous day. Thinking that there might have been the body of a human test subject inside the box gave her goosebumps. She turned around and pushed the button to call up the elevator. Just as the doors opened, she noticed someone approaching her from behind. She turned her head and saw Roberto. He had given her such a fright that she almost attacked him, but stopped herself just in time. "Hey, Becca, I wanted to ask you something. I was just thinking again about how that client's son was looking at you. Do you know him?" Her chest tightened, but she realized that he was probably testing her. She looked up at him with steady eyes. "No." A line appeared between her brows. "If you're thinking of matchmaking us, don't bother. He's not my type." Roberto burst out laughing. "Don't worry about that. I don't think Dr. Shananahan would approve of it either." He wiped a drop of spit from the corner of his mouth and turned around. Rebecca hurried into the elevator and pressed the button for the door to close. She waited until the elevator began to descend before she exhaled. Her heart pounded against her chest, and she trembled. She felt as if she was hyperventilating and decided to go outside for fresh air. The elevator doors opened on the ground floor, and she rushed into the bright sunlight. In her hurry, she didn't notice that Reggie was also outside. Rebecca hurried into the courtyard and took a deep breath, as if trying to cleanse herself of the impure air that had surrounded Roberto. She walked briskly and soon found herself at the entrance of the outdoor basketball court. Suddenly, a concerned voice interrupted her thoughts. "Becky, what's the matter?" She looked around and saw Kyle. Seeing him calmed her down instantly, and she gasped for air. Her eyes were wet, and her face flushed. "I'm so glad to see you. Roberto terrifies me." Kyle had never seen Rebecca look so pale before, even when they had been in Colombia. Back then, she had looked frightened, but she now seemed as if she were panicking. He strode over to her and held her in his arms. The chill in her body gradually subsided as she leaned against his chest. He made her feel safe and calm. She didn't want to be brave anymore. She wanted to be held and comforted. "Oh, Kyle, I'm so scared." Kyle hugged her even tighter and whispered in her ear. "It's okay. You're with me now, and I'll protect you." He took a deep breath, lowered his eyes, and looked at her. "Becky, you can ask to return to the base if it gets too much for you." She shook her head. "No, we should work together." Kyle knew she was stubborn, so he tried to coax her into telling him what had happened. "Did you see something? What did Roberto say to you?" Her lips trembled as she recounted her conversation with Roberto. She buried her face into Kyle's chest and cried softly. He rubbed her back to comfort her and thought for a moment. "I have an idea. Let's tell people we're dating." Rebecca looked up at him in surprise. "What do you mean? We can't date?" He lowered his head. "Who says spies can't date? It can be part of our ruse. It would seem quite natural that we find each other attractive. We're similar in age and arrived at the same time. We could say we were surprised to find love here." He grinned. "Besides, who else is handsome enough to sweep a pretty girl like you off her feet?" Rebecca lowered her eyes and mumbled, "Dr. Shananahan." Kyle narrowed his eyes and his face darkened. "I'll have to kiss you to stop you from saying things like that." She didn't reply. Instead, she pressed herself against his body as she tingled with delight. "Are you sure about this?" "Yeah, it gives me an excuse to be close to you. If Roberto causes trouble, I'll have enough reason to take him on because I'll be protecting my girlfriend." She nodded. His theory made sense, and she saw his point. She lifted her head and looked at him with her large almond-shaped eyes. Okay, but we'll only pretend while we're here. After this mission, we're not dating anymore. Kyle laughed softly. Okay, if you say so. She smiled with satisfaction. So, how do we announce it? We don't need to announce anything. The walls have eyes, and everyone will soon notice. He kissed her on the forehead. My sweet girlfriend. He hugged her again. Her eyes sparkled as she pouted. My fake boyfriend. He laughed again. Yeah, all right. My fake girlfriend. Kyle smiled, and he longed to kiss her. He noticed movement in the corner of his eyes and glanced over his shoulder. The person who had been standing there quickly disappeared. Reggie leaned against the wall and felt his heart sink as he replayed the scene in his mind. Reggie had been strolling about when he had seen Rebecca rush out of the elevator. She had seemed distraught, and he had wanted to ensure she was okay, so he had followed her around the building toward the outdoor basketball court. He had been about to call out to her when he had seen Kyle. Reggie would never forget what he had seen afterward. Rebecca had stopped walking and stood dead still. Kyle had hurried over to her and put his arms around her. She had seemed to melt into him, and they stood quietly as Kyle comforted her. Reggie had studied Kyle's facial expression and had noticed his hard demeanor soften as he spoke to her. It was the tenderness that only a man who loved a woman had. They had hugged for a long time, and she had eventually smiled and laughed happily. Reggie hadn't moved. Instead, he had stared at them and tried to figure out what they were saying. Rebecca hadn't noticed him and had been completely caught up in the moment. She had stood with Kyle's arms wrapped around her, and her eyes had shone. Reggie had never seen Rebecca behave like a timid girl before. She had always come across as courageous, intelligent, and decisive. But she was different when she was with Kyle. Reggie remembered the day at the racetrack when he had asked her if she was dating Kyle. She adamantly denied it, saying she wasn't ready to fall in love, and she had been genuine about it. He wondered if something had developed between them since she had joined the military. They were in the same squad and probably spent much time together. There was no history of feuds and grudges between their families, nothing that could result in the death of innocent lives. He sighed and felt bitter. Kyle was free to love Rebecca, unlike him, who had been born into a family fraught with drama and insurmountable problems. He felt his heart break as he watched them cuddle. He turned and walked around the corner of the building. His legs felt weak, and he slowly squatted down. His secret crush was over. Nothing would ever come of it, and he had to let his feelings for Rebecca go. As Reggie's world came crashing around him, Rebecca and Kyle held hands and walked away from the basketball court. At first, Rebecca didn't want to be seen holding Kyle's hand, but his fingers enveloped her tiny fist, and she felt safe. Their eyes twinkled, and they walked with their shoulders touching. Rebecca's gaze swept across the courtyard, and she noticed Reggie squatting against a wall. Their eyes locked briefly, and he raised his eyebrows. She recognized the look in his eyes and knew her suspicion about him had been correct. Kyle tightened his grip around her hand and had no intention of letting her break free. Rebecca looked at Reggie and smiled. Keeping up the pretense of never having met before, Reggie nodded politely and turned away. He leaned against the wall for a long time without moving. Kyle let go of Rebecca's hand when they reached the elevator. He looked at her and smiled. We no longer have to hide our affection for one another. She gazed up at him and pouted. You're using work to pursue your personal interests. He grinned at her. Yeah, I guess I am. She rolled her eyes. You're so thick-skinned. A security guard in the monitoring room watched the two young people walk out of the elevator. He wondered if they realized that there were cameras everywhere, and he chuckled. But in reality, Rebecca and Kyle knew that they were being watched. The more they could pad their ruse and create believable aliases, the better it would be for their mission. Before they entered the lab, Rebecca quietly told Kyle about the cardboard boxes she had seen. He suggested they investigate it urgently, saying that if there were a mole, he or she would most certainly be interested in the contents of the boxes and the data that came from the experiments on the test subjects. Rebecca and Kyle focused on their work, and the rest of the day was uneventful. Kyle had much more work to do than Rebecca. It would be their first dinner together as girlfriend and boyfriend, and he also wanted to have the time to take her back to her room afterward. He rushed through his work, making sure that he had completed everything he had to, and then he hurried to the canteen to meet her there. Rebecca enjoyed the special treatment she was getting from him, and she took full advantage of it. She poked at a piece of fat on her plate and pouted. "Oh, my darling boyfriend, I don't like fat. Would you like it?" She would usually push food she didn't like aside and not eat it, but she wanted to test Kyle's diligence as her boyfriend. He leaned over and peered at the piece of fat before piercing it with his fork and gulping it down in one bite. Rebecca grinned and pointed to another piece of meat. "This piece here has fat on it. Please, will you cut the fatty part off?" Kyle obediently cut the fat off and gobbled it up, leaving the lean meat behind on Rebecca's plate. She found Kyle's enthusiasm amusing, so she ate half a baked potato and pouted again. "I'm too full. I simply can't finish this potato. Would you like it?" He knew she was poking fun at him, and he rolled his eyes. As grown-up as she seemed, she still had moments of immaturity. "Becky, finish your dinner." She shook her head. "I don't have space for it. I've had enough to eat." Kyle sighed, took the half-eaten baked potato, and ate it. She bit her bottom lip before flashing him a cheeky smile. "Doesn't it bother you that I ate half already?" Without skipping a beat, Kyle grinned at her. "It's not the first time I'll taste your saliva." He winked at her and continued eating his dinner. Kyle ate fast, and although he had double the portion size of Rebecca's on his plate, he finished before her. He picked up their plates, placed them on the tray, and took them to a counter for the kitchen hand to collect. As they walked down the hallway toward her room, Rebecca turned to him. "Is this what I should expect from you as my fake boyfriend?" He hooked her arm in his. "Yeah, I'll treat you like a queen, whether I'm your fake or real boyfriend. And when we get married one day, I'll treat you just the same." Rebecca's body stiffened. She couldn't believe his audacity, suggesting that they would get married. He escorted her to her room and kissed her on the forehead. "I have some work to finish up." She nodded and batted her eyelashes. "It was lovely for you to join me for dinner. I'm sorry you have to go back to work now. You don't have to eat dinner with me every night if you're too busy." He smiled. "I don't mind." She closed the door, and Kyle turned around to leave. The facility was located in a remote area, and no hotels were nearby, so all guests and staffs were accommodated on the premises. The guest accommodation was on the first floor, and the staff were housed on different floors. Reggie sat in his room and stared blankly at a document on his desk. It was the preliminary contract of the project plan that he had to sign, but he couldn't focus on the contents, even though he had read through it several times. He sighed and pushed the document aside. He put on his shoes and left his room. He had seen Rebecca and Kyle eating dinner in the canteen earlier and guessed that they would have already finished and that Rebecca had gone back to her room. He tried to think why he felt so uneasy about her and Kyle. He wondered about it for a long time until a thought manifested. He suddenly felt a vague glimmer of hope. Rebecca and Kyle were on a mission, and it was evident that they were undercover. He knew they had to have credible backstories and behave accordingly to avoid raising anyone's suspicions. He wondered whether their relationship was part of their ruse, and thought that maybe they weren't really in love. He didn't like to speculate, and the uncertainty unsettled him. Reggie stood in the hallway and looked left and then right. He wasn't sure which direction to go to get to Rebecca's room. He also didn't know which floor she was on. He sighed with frustration and was about to walk toward the elevator when the door next to his room opened. It was Oliver. He had heard Reggie's door close and wanted to see if he was okay. He glanced at Reggie and noticed that he seemed irritated. "Is something wrong?" Reggie shrugged and went into Oliver's room. He sat down on the small couch and rubbed his hands together. "Dad, it's about Rebecca. I need to talk to her." Oliver had never heard Reggie speak of Rebecca. He pulled out a chair from behind the desk and sat down. "I'm not sure how I can help you. What do you want to talk to her about?" Reggie hesitated. "I want to help her find Callum." Oliver sighed. "We're doing everything we can to find him. I'm sure you know that." Oliver and Jonathan had pooled their resources into a concerted effort to find Callum. It had been more than 6 months since Callum had disappeared, and they still had no credible leads or news. "I know, Dad, but I still want to try. Please let me know the moment you have any information." Oliver saw the persistence in Reggie's eyes and realized how important it was to him. He patted his son's knee and smiled. "Sure, I'll keep you in the loop, but don't expect too much." Reggie got up and left. He decided to find an opportunity to speak to Rebecca in the morning. He had to ask her if she and Kyle were pretending to be a couple or if they were really in love. He went back to his room and tried to read through the contract again. Kyle was working with Jeremy in one of the labs used for clinical experiments. A few other staff members were milling about, and Kyle had to collect some stock in a small storeroom. He held a clipboard with a printout of an inventory clipped to it and walked while reading through the list. He didn't look up as he walked and accidentally went in the wrong direction toward the doors of the high-security lab. He scanned his access tag at the doors and looked up with a frown when the doors didn't open. He swiped his card again, puzzled that the doors weren't opening. He smacked his forehead and shook his head. Jeremy had been watching Kyle and had decided not to say anything. Although he had thought of telling him that he was going the wrong way, Jeremy preferred not to get involved in other people's business, so he decided to let Kyle figure it out for himself. Kyle looked around with a sheepish grin. He shrugged, spun around, and quickly walked to the storeroom. Rebecca was sitting in bed reading a book. Her phone lay on her bedside table, and she had switched it to silent mode. The phone lit up, and she saw an incoming message from Kyle. There was only one word in the message. "Done." Her eyes lit up, and she immediately understood what Kyle meant. She deleted the message, hoping that their plan would work. A large cardboard box stood in the middle of a lab. The box was unmarked and still sealed. Callum raised his hand and touched his neck. A tiny bump protruded from his skin. It was so small that it wasn't noticeable unless he ran his fingers over it. His eyes moved around under his closed eyelids. He knew what the tiny bump was. He slid his hand back and kept his eyes closed. A short while later, someone entered the room and opened the box. Callum's dark world suddenly lit up, but his eyes remained closed. He could sense the bright lights beaming down on him and felt 2 people lift him and place him on a cold steel examination table. A few seconds later, he felt the sharp sting of a needle piercing through his skin and the warmth of his blood being drawn. Then, he felt someone place an arm cuff around his arm and the sound of a blood pressure monitor in the background. He listened to the 2 people talking. "His vital signs are good." "Excellent. When he wakes up, we'll see if he still has 2 different personalities. Testing the new drug on him would be ideal." "Yeah, but we don't have much time. We have to finish our research in the next few days, or someone will notice that this lab is being used. I heard there's a new project starting next week on Friday." "Okay. I'll get it done as soon as possible." Callum listened to them and felt another needle prick his skin. A cold liquid ran into his veins, and he lost consciousness. It was quiet in the lab the next morning, and Rebecca noticed that a few people hadn't arrived from work. She peered into the office, but didn't see Dr. Shananahan sitting at his desk like he did every morning when their shift started. Only Shane sat behind his desk, paging through a document. He looked up at Rebecca and smiled. He loved to chat and was a good source of information. "Hi, Becca. You're out of luck if you're looking for Dr. Shananahan and the others. They've gone up to one of the high-security labs. There's a new project, and if it's successful, we'll all get good bonuses at the end of the year." He crossed his fingers and winked. Rebecca smiled politely and glanced toward the elevators. Kyle and Rebecca ate lunch in the canteen together as usual. They were halfway through their meal when Reggie strolled over. He put his tray down on the table. "Do you mind if I sit here?" Rebecca nodded, not sure why he would want to sit with them. Kyle didn't say anything. Instead, he took the initiative and ate a piece of fat that Rebecca had pushed to the side of her plate. Rebecca prodded her food and pierced a small green item with her fork. She took a bite and scrunched her face in disgust. "Why is it so bland and bitter?" Kyle looked at her, puzzled. Then he looked at the half-eaten item and chuckled. "It's just Brussels sprouts. Haven't you ever had one?" Rebecca took a large gulp of water and shook her head. "No, and I'm glad I haven't. That's disgusting." She hadn't looked at it properly before eating it and thought it was a green capsicum. She pushed her plate away. "I don't want to eat anymore." Kyle frowned. "It's really good for you. It's packed with vitamins, and I read somewhere once that it's a great antioxidant. You shouldn't be so picky." "I'm not picky. I just don't like the taste of it." Kyle knew better than to argue with her over food. He first ate the Brussels sprouts on his plate before leaning over to take hers. Rebecca thought he was going to eat hers and was shocked when he pushed the fork against her lips. He grinned. "Open wide. You need the vitamins." She glared at the fork and then glanced around the room, aware that everyone was staring at them. It hadn't taken long for the news of her and Kyle's budding romance to spread. There weren't many women at the facility, especially young, pretty ones, and many of the young men who had been fawning over her were jealous of Kyle. Rebecca understood why he had said there was no need to announce their relationship. She pursed her lips and didn't move, while Kyle held the fork in front of her mouth. They were both determined to get their way, and Kyle had buckets of patience. He lowered his voice and looked into her eyes. "I won't move until you've eaten this." Rebecca glared at him. She couldn't believe he was trying to force her into submission in front of everyone. Reggie shrugged. "I'll eat it if you don't want to. I love Brussels sprouts." She broke her gaze with Kyle and turned to look at Reggie. "Thank you." She had no principles regarding the food she didn't like. She was about to say something else when Kyle interrupted her. "Okay, fine. I'll eat it." Reggie looked at him and frowned. The atmosphere became tense, and Rebecca felt her head begin to ache. She looked at Kyle and then at Reggie. They were like two naughty schoolboys. She gave up and sighed. "Okay, let's compromise. I'll eat half of it." Rebecca's attempt to ease the tension between Kyle and Reggie had worked. Kyle sighed and lowered his fork. He cut the Brussels sprouts in half and put one half in his mouth. She lowered her eyes and gritted her teeth. Kyle's jealousy and possessiveness irked her sometimes. Her father wasn't even as bad as that. She told herself to stay calm as she reluctantly ate the remaining half. Her eyes watered, and she gagged slightly as she forced herself to swallow. She took another large gulp of water and pushed her chair out. She stood up and took her tray to the counter. Kyle watched her walk away and rolled his eyes. He also stood up, gave Reggie a dirty look, and placed his tray on the counter before leaving the canteen. Rebecca had gone outside for fresh air, and Kyle hurried to catch up. She was angry and was ignoring him, but he didn't care. He quietly walked beside her until his phone rang. "Yeah, I'll be there in a few minutes." He turned to Rebecca. "I've got to go. I'll see you later." She continued to ignore him and carried on walking. She heard someone calling for her as she was about to sit down on a small bench. "Hey, Becca, wait up." She turned her head and saw Reggie. His dark eyes seemed calm, and he smiled faintly. "I want to ask you something." Rebecca glanced around and tilted her head slightly, gesturing for them to move further away from other people walking about. Although there were no cameras, she didn't want to get too close to him, but she also didn't want to be too far away so that someone else could hear their conversation. She maintained a neutral facial expression. "Yeah, sure. What's up?" Reggie hesitated, and his dark eyes locked onto hers. "Are you and Kyle really dating?" His question didn't surprise her, so she held his gaze and replied confidently. Yeah, we are. Reggie wasn't about to give up. I'm not talking about your undercover operation. She continued to hold his gaze. Neither am I. She noticed a subtle change in his eyes, as if his confidence began to wane, but he pushed on. What if our families didn't have so many issues, and if Callum hadn't disappeared? Do you think there would have been a chance that you and I... His voice trailed off. Rebecca felt sorry for him. She didn't want to give him hope, or break his heart any more than what she realized she already had. I'm sorry, Reggie. None of that would have mattered in any case. I think I would have followed my heart, and I wouldn't have cared about what our families thought. Reggie's heart sank, and his hands began to tremble. So, it has nothing to do with our families or Callum. She took a deep breath. No, it doesn't. He gazed at her for a while longer, trying to find the right words. Eventually, he sighed and looked away. Okay. Rebecca lowered her eyes and was about to say something, but changed her mind. I'd better be going now. He cleared his throat. I just want you to know I'll never give up looking for Callum. She looked at him in surprise as he wiped his sweaty palms against his trousers and turned to leave. Rebecca didn't see Dr. Shananahan or anyone else from their team after lunch. She had completed her tasks for the afternoon and sauntered over to Kyle's desk to watch him process a batch of data. His fingers skipped nimbly across the keyboard, reminding her of his piano playing. He looked up at her while he waited for the data to upload to the server. Are you okay? She nodded. I heard that Dr. Shananahan and the others have gone to the high-security lab. Kyle focused on his screen again. Yeah. Suddenly, he turned away from the screen, looked around the room, and frowned. I haven't seen Katana anywhere either. Katana was the youngest in the team and had originally been responsible for Kyle's work. She had been redeployed after Kyle and Rebecca had arrived and was now working with biological extraction experiments. She had C-level authorization. Rebecca raised her eyebrows. I haven't seen Jeremy either. Do you know his authorization level? Kyle shrugged. I don't know for sure, but I think he's a B level, so he shouldn't be able to access the high security labs. Only those with A-level authorization are allowed. Rebecca narrowed her eyes and glanced at the surveillance cameras mounted against the ceiling. They spoke softly, and she stood close to Kyle, but it wasn't safe to talk, and they couldn't openly discuss their suspicions. Her phone rang, and she saw it was Dr. Shananahan calling. He instructed her to go to the storeroom on the second floor and collect the items on the inventory he had emailed her. She followed the stock acquisition procedure and printed the list before going to the second floor to collect the required items. The person in charge of the storeroom checked the list and disappeared into the storeroom. After a short while, he returned with a basket filled to the brim with various items used in experiments. Rebecca hurried into the elevator and pushed the button for the top floor, where the high-security labs were located. The elevator doors opened, and she hurried to the large doors of the high-security lab. She rang a small bell beside the access card scanner. One of the scientists opened the door to receive the basket, and Rebecca noticed a cleaner sweeping the floor. She gazed at the pile of dirt in the dustpan and saw a heap of fur. Rebecca felt her heart skip a beat when she saw the dark fur in the dustpan. The cleaner was still sweeping, and bits of fur filled the air. It didn't look like human hair at all. She wondered if she had been mistaken in thinking that the test subject in the high-security labs was human. By the looks of the fur, it was some type of animal. She bent over and pretended to tie her shoelaces as she secretly picked up a bit of the fur on the ground. She purposely bent her back toward the camera to hide her actions. As she straightened up and turned around to return to the elevators, she noticed a familiar figure through the transparent elevator doors. It was Jeremy. Rebecca hadn't had much interaction with him. He seemed introverted and indifferent. He usually spent his time behind his desk or in the lab, and she had seen him working out at the gym a few times. He seldom chatted to anyone, and almost always ate alone. Not wanting to be seen, Rebecca pretended to look for something in her pocket and walked behind a pillar to hide from him. She waited for him to leave the elevator and watched him walk down the hallway. She pulled her phone out of her pocket and sent Kyle a message before carefully following Jeremy. Rebecca had been trained in stealth techniques and crept quietly. Her footsteps were light, and she occasionally glanced over her shoulder to make sure she wasn't being followed. Jeremy turned a corner, and Rebecca waited in a shadow. The building had been designed with several interleading hallways with corners that the surveillance cameras couldn't monitor. She stopped when she heard voices. "What took you so long?" Rebecca held her breath. She immediately recognized the voice. It was Katana. Jeremy sounded anxious. "I had to finish something before I could get away." Katana sighed irritably. "Have you prepared it?" Jeremy spoke softly, and Rebecca strained her ears to hear him. "Yeah, it's ready." She noticed some excitement in Katana's voice. "Good. What shall I do to thank you?" The two of them remained silent, and then Rebecca heard them kissing. She frowned, surprised that they were in a secret relationship. She had never noticed anything between them. They were also complete opposites from one another. Katana was enthusiastic and lively, whereas Jeremy was rather dull. It was an interesting combination. She wondered what Jeremy had just given to her. Katana whispered, "Be careful. We'll die if the vial breaks and we're exposed to the contents." "It's okay. I made sure to seal it properly. The scientists will know how to handle it. But just be careful when you give it to them." Katana hesitated. "Don't you want to know what we're doing with it?" Jeremy kept quiet. He must have realized that the less he knew, the better. Rebecca's eyes went wide, and she wanted to catch a glimpse of them. She slowly edged against the wall, hoping she could take a video to give to Colonel Hunter as evidence. Peering around the corner, she noticed a pile of clothing on the floor. Her eyes gazed upward, and she blinked. She hadn't expected to see them in a heated moment of passion. Just as she was about to take her phone out of her pocket, she felt someone behind her. Before she could turn around, a hand covered her mouth and nose. Her heart leapt into her throat. She knew it wasn't Kyle. Suddenly, an overwhelming acrid smell entered her nostrils, and she saw spots floating in the air. Then, she lost consciousness. When Rebecca woke up, she found herself lying on her desk. Her neck ached, and she assumed she must have been lying on the hard surface for some time. She sat up stiffly, stretched her back, and looked up. Kyle was sitting opposite her, typing away at his computer. She sat up, feeling confused. "Have I been sleeping here all this time?" "Yep. I went out for a while, and when I came back, you were asleep on the desk. I was going to wake you up. You were sleeping so soundly, I couldn't disturb you." Rebecca's stomach lurched. What the heck happened? I'm sure it wasn't my imagination. Just then, the rest of their team, including Katana and Jeremy, were led back into the office by Dr. Shananahan. Rebecca hurriedly stood up from her desk and pretended as if nothing had happened. She greeted everyone politely. Dr. Shananahan spoke to them all in his soothing manner. "You've all worked hard today. Go back to your rooms and get a good rest. Tomorrow, the A-level engineers will have a meeting to prepare for the next stage of the project." Everyone muttered their appreciation. They were all tired and were happy to be getting off work. Everyone laughed, and Kyle and Rebecca headed to the canteen. "I know everything, Becky." Kyle was relieved to finally have an opportunity to tell her what he had found out. "When you sent me that message saying that you were following Jeremy, I followed you both. Then, I saw someone cover your nose and mouth with a cloth. I wanted to help you, but I had to stay hidden. They took you to the office and lay you on the desk." Rebecca gasped with shock. "Who was it?" "Who do you think?" She thought for a moment, and then she shook her head. "I don't know. Was it someone from our team?" "It was Dr. Shananahan." Kyle smiled triumphantly. "He's very smart. He was able to hide behind you without you noticing. After he knocked you out, he picked you up, flung you over his shoulder, and took you back to the office. Rebecca's mind was in a mess. Why do I feel like there's something wrong with all of them? I don't think Jeremy and Katana are who we're looking for. Based on the evidence that we saw today, it's not clear if they're the spies that Colonel Hunter mentioned. Jeremy only seems to want money and sex. The things he sold were only B-level, and he manufactured them himself. Rebecca looked at him inquisitively. How do you know all of this? I was there. I saw it all. When Dr. Shenanihan was following you, I saw the whole process from another angle. The entire process? Kyle knew what she was hinting at, and he felt a little awkward. Well, about that, it's not like it's anything new to me. I've watched a lot of videos, that sort of thing. Seeing it in person is very different, but it's not like I had no idea what was going on. Rebecca stared at him, speechless, and he quickly changed the subject. Katana's obviously working for some organization, but whoever it is, they're probably targeting a foreign force, such as extremists. I don't think we need to concern ourselves with her too much. But Colonel Hunter's talking about spies that are relaying all the information from the high-level experiments here. The person might be doubly crossing their own country. Kyle nodded. It's possible. With the activation of these top-secret experiments, I believe we'll find out soon. After Rebecca and Kyle had finished their meal, Kyle had to return to work. Rebecca had no more work to do that day, but she didn't want to go home alone, so she accompanied him back to the office. As they stepped outside, she looked up into the night sky. It was a clear night, and the stars shone brilliantly. Kyle followed her gaze and saw the array of stars. Are you remembering Mexico? That night in the Mexican desert, when they had been punished for releasing explosives without authorization, the sky had been filled with stars. Yeah, isn't it beautiful? Rebecca stared up at them, mesmerized. Oh my gosh, Kyle, I just saw the constellation that I saw in Mexico. Remember? There were 3 stars that were all at different distances from each other, but they were on the same line and just as bright as one another. I named them the 3 brothers. I just saw them again. Kyle chuckled. They're millions of light years away, Becky. So no matter where we are on this earth, we'll always see the same stars. Rebecca knew that, but it still felt like some sort of magical connection. She sighed. We're nothing but tiny drops in the ocean, and these few decades we have in this life are just things that can be flicked between the stars. Kyle took her hand in his and squeezed it. So we should make the most of our time and live our lives without regrets. We are indeed just drops in the ocean, but it's important to have family that loves us. His hand felt big and strong in hers. She always felt safe and secure when she was with him. She sighed and changed the subject. When are we going back to the laboratory? Tomorrow. Everyone's been busy all day today, and Dr. Shenanihan told us all to get some rest. So I guess something will happen tomorrow. Will we have to work late again tomorrow? The experiments usually take a few days to complete, and getting into the high-security labs isn't easy, so I'd say so. Rebecca was relieved. I saw a lot of fur in the high-security lab when I delivered that equipment, and my guess is it's from a gorilla. I also noticed some outside another lab when I was following Jeremy. Kyle nodded thoughtfully. Becky, can I ask you something? Asking me that is asking me something, she chuckled. When you're doing experiments with your supervisor, do you pack everything up when you're done so that you leave no trace of anything? Of course, that's an essential part of the process. Every senior researcher who carries out experiments has to ensure they don't leave anything behind. As soon as she had finished speaking, her eyes widened in realization. That's it. That tuft of hair shouldn't have been left outside that other lab. Nobody would have made such a stupid mistake as that. Exactly. So someone must have deliberately left it there for us to find. Rebecca's heart raced. It felt like it was beginning to close in. So Dr. Shenanihan called me and asked me to get that equipment for him. Then He knocked me out with a sedative to stop me from getting closer to Jeremy and Katana. Did he leave the evidence for us to see? Is he an enemy or a friend? That's what I've been wondering. Although I found nothing unusual in Colonel Hunter's file about him, there are some things I can't quite get my head around. Rebecca shrank into his arms. You know what I'm realizing? That the most terrifying thing is not natural disasters or war, but the human heart. Kyle wrapped his arms around her and held her tight. When this is all over, we'll report back to Colonel Hunter and we'll take a vacation. That sounds good. The next day, Kyle and Rebecca went into the office just as the other staff members were arriving. Dr. Shenanigan called them all into a meeting, and about halfway through, he told all those with authorization lower than B level to leave the room. Kyle sent a message to Rebecca as they left the office. The operation had begun.